Hi everyone. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the ACS exam review. So this is going to be kind of different from my other videos, and I'm really just going to focus on talking about what I've done to help with my ACS exam and what I think my students should do, what I wish my students would do. So it is going to be a little bit different than some of my other videos because I'm not going to be solving any practice problems. I'm just going to be talking to you guys about how I recommend that you study, and then I'll link some resources below. So first off, for my students, the final exam that we take is the American Chemical Society Standardized Final Exam. And I think some students get kind of freaked out because this is like a standardized exam, sort of like the ACT or the SAT, where you like go sign up and sit at a computer lab and like fully take the exam. But that's not what you'll be doing for the final. So some of your institutions may do that, but for my students, what we actually have is an old version of that. So like from 5 or 10 years ago, we purchased a set of exams and they were kept like very much under lock, what year it is and everything. And we just administer that exam in our classroom. So you're not going to be sitting for an official exam that's going to go on your record, right? It's just a previous year's exam that we've taken and that we'll be administering in the classroom. So it's kind of a bummer because it means you can't write on the ACS exams that we give you. We'll give you scratch paper, but you can't write on them and all of that. But it will be like an appropriate, or it will be like a not on your final record, just like the same as any other exam you take in your class, but it's an old previous version of the ACS exam. So I just want to clarify that. Other students, your final exam at your institution might be different, but that's what we do for our students at UNT as of, what year is it? 2022. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. And then I also want to say that then that also means that ACS exam covers like a pretty broad range of things that I don't think all of the instructors at UNT actually cover. So pay close attention to your instructor and see what they're going to do with those questions that they haven't covered that information yet, but it might be on the ACS exam. So like I know one professor makes anything they haven't covered yet like a bonus question, or another professor who just drops all the questions they haven't covered yet. So pay close attention to what your professor is planning on doing. And also many of them will curve up to the national average. So like say the national average is 50 on the overall exam, then like in their class, a 50 would be like a B, or I don't know, whatever their curving scheme is. So pay close attention to your instructors, like what they are planning on doing to the ACS exam, because it might not be the same, across the board. It's not usually the same across the board. So now on how to prepare, and this is what I would do if I was taking the ACS organic exam to sit for it, or for the written exam that you have to take for your final. So, first, I think you should start sooner than later. So I think starting is really hard. I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and like one of the debilitating things about ADHD is starting is so hard. But after I've started, and I think that this is true even for people who don't have ADHD, but I don't know. After I've started, it's so much easier to keep going on that task. So if you can just start now, it's not like, oh, I still have to start for my OCHM final. You'll already have started and you're just going to keep studying. And I just think that makes it easier. Then the next, and I will, to make myself start, I will like bargain with myself. So I guess I'm just like not naturally a very disciplined student. So I'll say things like, okay, I'm just going to do organic chemistry practice problem for 15 minutes, but I'm going to do it while I listen to my favorite podcast. Or I'll put an old episode of something that's not going to distract me, like, Parks and Rec or Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I'm going to put that on TV, and I'll have that on the background, and that will make it like that's my treat for starting on something that I don't really have to do right now, because there's not immediate consequences if I don't study for my final, but that will make my life easier later. And usually what will happen is I'll start working, and then I'll be in it, and I won't even realize that I'm not paying attention to that thing anymore. So that's something that I do, is I just like start a 15-minute timer. There's also a study, I love this study, on medical students. So I know a lot of you want to go to medical school, a lot of people who are taking the ACS exam, or you're going to be grad students, but either way, this is really important for how to learn organic chemistry or learn anything. They did a study where they did a 4-hour course where students learned how to perform a surgery, students, medical students. And then they did 4 hours spread out over like 4 weeks. So the students would come in for an hour and they got the same training, but it was spread out over 4 weeks. And the study showed actually that then they came in and tried to complete the surgery. And the study showed that the students who had taken the one-time 4-hour course did statistically significantly worse than the students who had taken the 4-hour course spread out over 4 weeks, because every time they went back to that classroom and they like restarted over their surgery class, they were interrupting the forgetting process. They were reminding themselves of the material that they'd done. And so that process really cemented their new knowledge in their mind and connected it to the pathway so that they had easy access to that. So if you need long-term access to organic chemistry, it's going to be better for you if you study a little bit at a time, if you need it for the MCAT, if you need it for if you're going to grad school. Either of those things, if you need long-term access to organic chemistry knowledge, studying little by little is going to cement it in your brain more. So you will make more use of the time that you're doing if you start studying now little by little. That will help you out later in life more if you're really going to need organic chemistry later. And then the other thing is varied practice. There's another study, there's a book called Making It Stick where it talks about like learning things well. And they talked about how like it was a beanbag toss. So people who had to toss like a beanbag 2 feet could practice either at the 2 foot mark over and over again, or at the 1 foot mark and the 3 foot mark. Like those were kind of their options. And the ones who varied it, who did the 1 and 3, were more likely to score in the 2 foot mark. Similarly, they like studied how people learn a task in a factory, and they actually learn the task better if they don't learn step 1, 2, 3, 4. They learned it better if it was like step 1 and then step 4 and then step 2 and then step 7. Like they varied their practicing, and those people learned more rapidly. So you also want to incorporate some of that into your studying. So those studies on how people learn are how I shaped my plan for how I was going to study for the ACS exam whenever I had to study for it. And I actually didn't take the ACS exam until grad school, so I didn't take it as a student, and I took it really seriously because I had to pass it with a really high grade to be able to continue on in chemistry grad school. That was part of the requirements. I know not everyone has the same goals as me, so you don't have to study like as intensely as I studied unless you're trying to get like a perfect score on it or whatever, but these are just my tips for how to help you study. And then the very last thing is, this is just the very last thing of my general information, I guess. I have a lot more things that I'm going to talk to you about, is the earlier chapters are going to seem so much easier to you. I know that's hard to believe now. There's a few exceptions. I think the stereochemistry chapter, we don't talk about it as much later on, so I think students struggle with that, but you have been using condensed formula with implied hydrogens, you've been doing acid-base, you've been doing pKa, you've been drawing curved arrows, you've been doing all these things and speaking in the language of organic chemistry that you didn't know at all when you started OChem 1. And so I really think when you go back chapter 1, chapter 2, hybridization, formal charge, those things you're going to know a lot better. Acid bases, I think, are going to be easier for you because we're even revisiting them in the like end of semester subject material. Elimination reactions and addition reactions, you've been doing them a lot, and they're actually substitution reactions are really similar to the carbonyl chemistry we're doing now. So I think you'll have a better understanding of like how to sort of I think it'll be easier for you. You've been doing organic chemistry for so long. I think your OChem 1 stuff is not going to be as difficult as it was the first time you took it. You already know it. You're just reminding yourself of it, and you use it all the time in class, even more than you think. Okay, so that's all my general advice for preparing for the exam. Now, I'm going to tell you some things I did daily. I'm going to tell you about the practice exam that I took. I'm going to tell you what I think you should do right before the exam, and then things to do when you're actually taking the exam to help you study a little bit. So first, things that I did every day leading up. So I published a schedule for you. You can follow it. You don't have to. I basically went back like 3 weeks-ish before my exam, and I spent one day a week doing a deep dive on a chapter. So I would do one deep dive on a chapter that I needed to review. So like chapter 1 and 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. I would just like do a chapter that day, do a deep dive. And then I would also, so I'd like deep dive on that. And then I would also do a little bit of random studying from other chapters to get that varied practice in. So I'd just like pull a chapter and do 2 or 3 questions from like randomly chapters. And then I also, every day I reviewed my notes, I reviewed flashcards, and I reviewed audio recordings that I made during my deep dive. So that's what I did every day. And what I mean by a deep dive is I would pull out my notes for a chapter, so the PowerPoints from your instructor, and I would look over them, and then I've talked a lot about this, but I would reorganize those notes into charts, or like, hey, these are the key things that I think we need to know from this chapter. Like I would break down my notes and organize them in a way that made sense to me. So like that's actually when I came up with the nucleophile. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen this video, but when I was really struggling with substitution and elimination studying for my ACS exam, I was like, oh, if I just look at the nucleophile, and if it's strong, it's going to do 2. If it's weak, it's going to do 1. And then these other things lead it to it. And then I started testing that out, and it worked. So that's a good example of like, reorganize your notes in a way that makes sense to you, or like draw charts or whatever is helpful for you. And I have a lot of videos on studying. I'll link to it below in my Google Doc with like all my video resources. So reorganize your notes. And then for things that were particularly difficult or things I needed to memorize, like PKA, I made a flashcard with all the PKAs on it, or if there's like reagents that were hard for me to remember, so like the 3 ways that you can add water to a double bond, it's like hydroboration, oxidation, oxymercuration, demercuration, acid catalyzed. I made flashcards for those so that I could be like, oh, these reagents, it's this reaction and it adds with this regiochemistry, and these are the special things I need to remember. So, and then I also have reviews by chapter that you can go look at that kind of have some of that same information that I've posted online for my students, or if you're not one of my students, you can email me. And then, so I would review my notes, I would organize them, I would make flashcards. Flashcards work well for me because when I was in college, I waited tables, and so I would go stand at the terminal, like if there was a downtime, like on a lunch shift or whatever, and I would just flash through those cards, and I would literally study at work. So for those of you who have a job that would allow for that, or I would do it while I was brushing my teeth. I would just sit there, like instead of scrolling TikTok, we didn't have TikTok back then, so I would be on flashcards. I would do it like while I was sitting down to eat a meal, or while I was watching TV on like commercial breaks or whatever. I would be practicing my flashcards, and that's again that like varied practice, because I would just like add to the stack of flashcards every time I did a deep dive. It's all the chapters in there, and it's doing it like interrupting your forgetting process over and over. So that's a really good technique. I also started to use my iPhone to record myself, basically doing audio flashcards. So I would record myself saying, if you use these reagents, what happens? If you use this reagent, what happens? Like basically the highlights from the notes, And then I would pause, like, if you do this plus this, what happens? And then I would pause long enough for like myself who's listening to answer. And then I would say, this happened. So I could basically study while I was walking around my neighborhood, while I was biking, anytime I was exercising. So for those of you who like to be at the gym, this is a way for you to study and work out at the same time, get your mental health and get your studying in. So I would also do that, or I would listen in the car sometimes, or just like play it if that's safe. I don't want to encourage you to do anything that's not safe, but that is something I really like, to listen to things while I'm doing other stuff, while I'm cooking dinner, while I'm working out. So I would do that a lot. So every day I would do one deep dive in a chapter. I would do a little bit from random chapters, and then I would review my old notes, flashcards, and audio recordings. And I did that every single day leading up to my ACS exam. I would say, depending on how good your previous notes are and depending on how deep your understanding is, that's probably going to take you, I don't know, like maybe an hour to combine all that stuff, or maybe 30 minutes, depending on how good your previous notes are. My previous notes were not good, so I had to do a lot of work to remind myself because I was taking this exam later. And then I would also do a lot of practice problems as part of my deep dive. And where I would get my practice problems from is any old quizzes, exams, recitation work, anything I had from my instructors that covered that chapter. I would do those deep dive practice problems. And then I used this book. So this is the official Preparing for Your ACS in Organic Chemistry book. This is available to purchase, but you can also come to my office and borrow this during my office hours, or you can go to the Chemistry Resource Center. There may be other ways of obtaining it, but that aren't legal, so I'm not going to encourage you to do that. But this book helped me so much. So I would do the problem. I used my Solomon's textbook primarily. So I would review my notes and then check if there was any useful problems in my Solomon textbook. I would look at my recitation work. I would look at my old quizzes, any homework practice problems I had. Dr. Berhay has really good practice problems that I've posted as well for Dr. Corrales' students that just go chapter by chapter. And then I would come here, and in this book, it's not exactly in line with the Solomon's textbook, as you can see here. Like, it goes based on like acids and bases, stereoisomers. So it's like not based on the chapters that we do in our book. It's more on concepts. So I would look for whatever topic was in that chapter I was doing, and then I would go there and I would do the practice problems in that chapter. And what I like about this book is there's a little bit of review here at the beginning of the chapter where it's like, here's an overview of what you need to know for this. And then for each of the study questions, there's a detailed explanation of what answer is right and why, and they're good explanations. Like, a lot of times I feel like explanations aren't really good. I really like these explanations. And then there's also a ton of like without explanations, just like quick practice problems that you can do. I think there's like between 10 and 20 just like ACS practice problems at the back of every single chapter in this book, and none of them are wrong. So like sometimes practice problems you get online, the answer keys aren't right. Even our test banks that we get, the answer keys aren't always right. I have to always check with a colleague, like, do you agree with these answers? These are all right. So this is a useful tool, but you don't have to purchase it to succeed. So that's one place I get practice problems from. So for me, I would do practice problems from every single one of those. You also have your online homework, and I would not go back and redo online homework because the formatting can be like such a B word. But if you can do those problems by hand and then just check your answer to make sure that you have the concepts, that's a good additional way to get extra practice problems. So I would do practice problems from all of those on each chapter. So that's what I did every day. A little bit of questions from like random chapter work, a deep dive into one chapter where I organized my notes, made flashcards, note cards, and did a ton of practice problems. And then I would review the notes and the audio recordings from that day and all the previous days so that I was continuing to reinforce what I'd learned. So that's a pretty in-depth study technique. That's a lot. That is what I felt I needed to do to be able to get the grade that I wanted on the exam. I don't want to overwhelm you and say, like, you can only pass if you do all this stuff. You might not even care. I think you could pass if you did less than that for sure. But this is what I did, and these things really helped me to succeed. And I know there are students who are really relying on their final to like boost up their grade. And I know there are students who are really wanting to understand organic chemistry well and solidify this before they take the MCAT. And so for those people, for anyone who finds this valuable, this is what I did every day leading up to it for every chapter. And I would say it was a lot of work, of course. I think The deep dive probably took like 30 minutes to an hour because my notes weren't very good. And then the practice problems, they could take a long time. I mean, depending on how many I got through, I could spend an hour to 2 hours on just practice problems every day. And you don't have to do it all at once, whatever. And any amount that you do starting now is better than nothing. So if you're like, I don't have 3 hours and I don't have the discipline to make myself study for 3 hours, I totally understand that. Again, I have ADHD. It is so hard to make myself start tasks. So even if you just do 15 minutes and you just review your notes and make your flashcards right now, that is more than if you do nothing, and it will help set you up when you do start studying for your final more in depth once that time comes closer. So anything you can do at this point in your preparation is better than nothing. I just wanted to share for students literally everything that I did when I was taking my ACS exam. If you feel like you really don't have a good understanding of the material itself, and you're not just reviewing, you're like actually learning concepts for the first time maybe, I love this book. It's called Organic Chemistry as a Second Language. There's a first and second edition. This is by David Klein. And this book has really good practice problems. It does what's called scaffolding. So it's like, here's a little bit of information. Here's a question on that. Here's a little bit more information. Here's a more complex question. And it works you up to the kinds of questions that we ask on the ACS exam. So this can be a useful tool for you if you haven't already been using it. I'll sometimes use it to make practice problems for recitations or for my students. So definitely check that out. So those are all the places I get practice problems. Those are all the resources that I use. This is what I do on a daily basis starting like 3 weeks ahead of time. And I posted the schedule of like probably what I would do if I was taking it this semester on May 9th or 10th or whenever y'all are taking your exam. So that's how I would study. And then I make a practice exam for myself. So I've talked a little bit about my mental health issues. I have ADHD. I also have anxiety. And that manifests itself as test anxiety, especially on high stakes assessments. So when I was taking my ACS exam, that was a really big deal for me because I had to get a really good grade or I couldn't keep going in grad school. So that's like high pressure, right? So I made myself a practice ACS exam. And what I personally did was I saved the back of the chapter question books, just like these ones that didn't have a thorough explanation. I didn't do any of them. I didn't look at any of them. I saved them. And then there's a lot of them. It's longer than an ACS exam would be. I scheduled like 3 days before my ACS exam to take the practice exam, where basically I just sat and looked at those questions only and did only those questions, wrote down my answers to all of them. I went up to the university. I sat in a room that would be very similar to the one I'd be taking my exam in. So like if you went to the library or something, I did it at the exact same time I'd be taking my exam. And I just sat there and took it. And the whole time I was taking my practice exam, I felt like I was going to throw up. Like, I was so anxious. Like, I can't tell you the depth of anxiety I felt when I was doing my practice ACS exam because I was like, I'm going to fail and then I'm not going to be able to take grad school. Like, I'm a worst case scenario kind of a person. But I took it, I graded it. I was able to see my areas of weakness. I was able to focus in on those areas over the next few days. And then when I took my actual exam, I did not feel like I wanted to throw up the whole time because I'd already done it once. Like I tricked my body into doing all that anxiety and then getting it out. And I can't tell you how much that helped me succeed in my ACS exam. Like I didn't have to sit there fighting the urge to throw up the whole time or like feeling the like red color in my face. My face, I don't know if you can tell right now, but my face is getting red just thinking about how anxious I was when I took that ACS exam. I have really bad test anxiety for things like that. So I cannot encourage you enough to take a practice exam. And it's even better if you make your own practice exam. So if you want to do what I did and use this book, there's going to be material that we didn't cover in here. So, take that as you will. You could take all your previous exams and put them together and go sit through them and take all of those. I don't know if Dr. Corrales and I are going to make an ACS like a practice exam. There's a possibility I might do that. But I don't know, because I have a lot going on right before the final, because I'm defending. So, whatever resources you can find to put together, I like save those questions, and I think about like getting 2 to 4 questions per exam. So you could go into those chapter by chapter practice problems, whatever it is, 2 to 4 questions by chapter. I pull those out to get roughly the number of questions that there's going to be on the final. And then I save those and I don't look at them and I try not to work them again. I am red and splotchy just talking about my test anxiety. I don't know how much you could tell, but it's like I get so anxious. So that's a little window into like some of my challenges as a student. But I will put all those questions together. I save them. I try not to work them. And then I really try to recreate the testing conditions that I'm going to be in for my exam. It just really, really, really helps me. So I really encourage you to do that. The other thing that does is it builds your confidence up, because a lot of times you'll do like a few questions and then check your answers. On the exam, you don't get to check your answers. So you're like, I could be getting all of these wrong and I won't know. But if you take a practice exam, you will know how you're doing, and that can build up your confidence. It helps you know that you know more than you think you do. And even the process of thinking about what would my professor probably test me on forces you to think about the material that we've gone over, and that's beneficial for you as a student. So there's so much about making and taking a practice exam that's helpful, that this is like probably one of my number one study techniques that I really, really hope that my students use, because it helped me so much. Then you can grade it, go over, make sure you got everything right. And then, or whatever you got wrong, circle that. Try to identify the concepts that you're consistently getting wrong. So like, I remember one thing I found is like triangles. I always get the triangle stereochemistry questions wrong. So I knew that, and I worked on those a lot leading up to my ACS exam. And I don't know if you'll be able to use your model kit, but you could like even have the model ready or something if you're struggling on something like that. And then I think that's everything. So those are the big things for practice exam. So far, I've gone over general things about studying, what stuff I personally did every single day to study, and then what's important about a practice exam. Now, leading up to the exam, I really, really encourage you to get enough sleep. Like after you take your practice exam, grade it, spend a few days going over whatever areas of your weakness are, and then the day before the exam, get enough sleep. I really encourage you not to pull an all-nighter. They're so bad for your health. If you're going to stay up really late and forego sleep one night to study, don't do it right before the final, because that's not going to help you. Sleeping really does help your brain process information. If you're going to forego sleep, do it 3 or 4 days or a week before the final. Learn what you need to learn then. And then right before the final, the day before final, get enough sleep so that your brain is functioning optimally for you to get the best grade that you can get on your ACS exam. I also encourage you to eat a good breakfast or lunch that's not going to cause you to crash partway through. So like, I know if I have a nice protein smoothie in the morning, that sustains me for like 3 or 4 hours. I don't get a sugar crash. It helps me focus. If I eat biscuits with butter and jelly, it tastes really good, but it can upset my stomach and I can get a bad sugar crash, and then I'm not in the optimal position for my exam. So make sure that you eat something that helps you, that's not going to upset your stomach, that's not going to cause your like nervous stomach to get any worse, that's not going to give you a sugar crash and make your brain all foggy. Like, do something that your body is kind of used to eating. So get enough sleep, get a good breakfast. If your exam's early, this is embarrassing for me, but I have ADHD, so my brain does not function 100%, and I don't always wake up at alarms. And I sleep very hard. And so I can sleep through anything, especially in college when I wasn't consistently getting enough sleep. So on my big exam days, I actually had my mom call me to make sure that I woke up. And my husband now, if I have something really big that I'm worried about missing, I'll have my husband promise me that he'll make sure I wake up. Because that's just like a struggle that I have in life. So if you also struggle with that, make sure that there's someone who's like got your back so you're not going to oversleep for your exam. That is the worst feeling. And also plan to get there early, because if there's any traffic or if anything weird happens, It's better for you to get there early and have extra time. But if you're running late, you're just not going to be in the best mental state to perform well on your exam. So those are my day before, day of exam tips. When you're taking the actual exam, a lot of people go to schools like when they're growing up that really, really help them. I just realized that my plant has a new baby on it. Look at this. It has a new little tiny, it's hard to see. It has a new little tiny baby right there. I don't think you can see it. Anyway, so a lot of you went to schools that probably helped you prepare for how to take exams, but some people's schools didn't really go over good test-taking techniques. So I'm going to share with you some good test-taking techniques that really, really helped me on organic chemistry exams specifically. So first I go through the exam and I do the easiest ones first. And that helps you to be sure that you're getting points from the ones that you know. Like, I've got it cold. I never mess up on this kind of question, or like I rarely mess up on this kind of question. So I'm going to do these ones first. Go back through and do the ones that are harder or that you're not 100% sure where to start, but you think you know. And then save the absolute hardest ones for last, because then you're not going to waste time trying to figure out hard ones and use time that you could have been using on questions that you would most likely get right on the hard ones, right? So like use your upfront time on questions that you're probably going to get right so that you're calm, you have as many right answers as you can possibly think of. Like have a little list of all the numbers and fill those in. Get those questions right first, then do the medium ones, and then last go through and do the ones that you feel like you have no idea on. If you're in the middle of the exam and you're looking at it and you're kind of freaking out because you're like, I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. My biggest piece of advice to you is try not to freak out. I know that's easier said than done. I have anxiety too. I can really get in my head. But some things I do to reset myself from freaking out is one thing is I will just stop and flip to the back of the exam, and I'll start from the back to the front, because all of it is covering like the same major ideas, right? So like you're covering chapter 1 through 20, and I guarantee you your professor did not put it in order from chapter 1 through 20. So sometimes I would just be like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. All these questions are really hard. Flip to the back. It'd be some of the easier questions. And then I would go from the back to the front instead and just work the questions that way. So if you're freaking out, that's a way to stop. Another thing to do is when you get to those questions that you really feel like you have no idea what you're doing, you know more than you think you do. So if you know more than you think you do, then look at the question and say, like, maybe I don't know what this word is, but what do I know? So just yesterday in recitation, I had a student who was like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And I was like, okay, well, what are your thoughts? And they started talking about a word that they didn't know, and they're freaking out. And I was like, don't look at any of this. Look at these two things that you have and tell me how you think these two things would interact with everything you know. And that student was able to almost complete the entire question without ever looking at her notes. And it was pretty new material, right? So if you can do that for yourself, if you can be me in your exam and say, stop freaking out, what do you know? What do you think would happen here? Take your best guess. Talk to me about what you definitely know about organic chemistry. That will help you a lot on those questions where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. At the very least, what you can do is eliminate answers that you know are wrong. So if you see MCPBA, right, that's the peroxy acid, that forms epoxides and it does a Baeyer-Villiger oxidation. We just learned Baeyer-Villiger oxidation in class yesterday, so if you don't remember that, that's fine. It's not going to do anything else besides those things that you've learned so far. So you can eliminate anything that's not one of those two things, right? Like that's gonna eliminate a lot of questions there. Or yeah, I had a student in my office the other day who saw MCPBA was going to make an epoxide. She didn't know what the step before it was, but she was like, I need an epoxide, which means it has to have a double bond, so this must be an elimination. And she didn't realize this was an elimination reaction, but was able to work backwards from the step before to get to and realize it was an elimination. So you might be able to like use things that you know to eliminate wrong answers. Like you have learned so much about organic chemistry. Even if you're not a top A student, you're at the end of OChem 2, and you don't get to the end of OChem 2 without doing a lot of work and learning a lot. So use what you have learned to eliminate wrong answers, to make educated guesses, and do your best to work through those problems. Also, there's no negative points. Like, I think there's some exams where if you put a wrong answer, you get points counted off. You do not get points counted off wrong on the ACS exam or on your final. Like, it's not negative points if you get something wrong. It's just not positive points, right? So you just don't get points at all. So if you're not sure, guess. Do not leave an answer blank. If it's the last minute, just guess. You have a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. 24%, that's pretty good. So if you're not sure, please, please, please don't leave it blank. My computer charger is dying, so I might pause here in a second. Please don't leave it blank. Just guess and use what you know to try to do the best guess. But even if you're like out of time and you realize there's two that you haven't even looked at, just bubble something in. Something is better than nothing. I think those are all of my test taking techniques. I really hope that you guys feel like this was helpful to you and helped you prepare. If you have any questions for me, please drop them in the comments below. I will include in the caption a link to a Google Drive that has all my video resources sorted by chapters, and that has like a written document with a lot of these same things that I think will help. And yeah, I think that's everything in preparing for the ACS exam. No matter what, you should be really proud of yourself. You can't have gotten here if you didn't do a lot of work. So I'm really impressed that you made it all the way to the end of Organic Chemistry 2. And I think that you should really take pride in that. And then also remember, like, I didn't do well in OChem the first time I took it. I did have to retake it. And I had to retake it again when I got to grad school because it took me a long time to develop a mastery in it. But I really liked it. And I kept working hard. And eventually I did develop mastery. So if this exam, or if any exam in any class ever, doesn't go the way that you think it should go or that you want it to go, it is not a comment on you as a student, and it's not some kind of like statement that you're never going to succeed at the things you want to do. You know, if I had looked at my first OChem grade and said I got a B on OChem 1, a C in OChem 2, I'm never going to make it, then I probably wouldn't have. But I was like, hey, I like organic chemistry research. I think I'm going to keep going in this field. And I really, really am thankful that I did that. So don't get too in your head about one exam. Ultimately, one exam can have a big impact on your grade from one semester, but there's so much more to life. And if you don't do well, you can take it again. If you have friends and family members who care about you, you know, like your basic needs are met, your value comes from who you are as a human being, not from how you're doing on this exam. This is just like performing a task. This is not a reflection on who you are or your abilities as a student. So don't put too much weight into it. Just do the best you can to show everything that you've learned this semester, and be really, really proud of yourself for how far you've come in organic chemistry, because a lot of people did not even make it to the end of this class. So congratulations. I'm really proud of you. I believe in you. Good luck studying, and let me know if you need any help.